There's an opportunity for you right here and now to change your world. And it starts with facing a harsh reality. Our country has a problem. At first glance, it's a problem that may seem worlds away from your comfortable existence. In reality, it is directly tied to the success and well-being of your family, friends, and community. And it affects every state in the nation. For the first time in our country's history, 1 out of every 100 adults is living behind bars. That's an increase of nearly 300% over the last 30 years, more than any other nation. Common sense tells us that increased incarceration has made our society a much safer place to live in, but crime rates are nearly the same as when the number of prisoners was just a fraction of the present total. Few would argue the need to lock up violent criminals who repeatedly endanger our communities. However, mandatory minimums, prison terms for parole and probation violations, and the so-called war on drugs have crowded our prison cells with non-violent, lower-level offenders. Drug offenses alone account for 45% of federal prisoners, 56% of state prisoners, and 64% of local jail inmates. As the number of prison beds has multiplied, so has the cost of maintaining them. Between 1987 and 2007, state corrections expenditures rose from $33 billion to nearly $73 billion. That's 121%. When compared to a 21% increase for higher education, the magnitude of this crisis is laid bare, forcing a stark reckoning of the ways that flawed policies have weakened our communities. The massive expenditure on corrections affects everyone, but struggling communities that count on state resources for education and social programs suffer most, and the families from these communities become increasingly marginalized. As opportunities dry up, criminal activity thrives. In 2008, over 50% of all adults sent to prison in New York City came from only 12% of its neighborhoods. The dramatic absence of so many family members, neighbors, and economic producers and consumers is devastating. At the same time that nearly $500 million in state and city funding for schools was cut, nearly $500 million was spent to incarcerate residents of those very communities most likely to be hit hardest by education cuts. In the state of Connecticut, for every dollar spent on higher education, $1.03 is spent on corrections. In addition, the school achievement gap between students from the wealthiest and poorest communities is the widest in the nation. A high school dropout has a greater chance of being incarcerated, as much as 75% greater. Despite the best efforts of family, friends, and teachers, that person may resort to alternative means of survival, continuing the costly cycle of crime and incarceration, and affecting the safety of everyone. So how do we put a stop to the erosion of whole communities, the hemorrhaging of our state's financial coffers, and the loss of priceless human capital, and still effectively punish criminal activity? One answer lies in community-based corrections. The guidance from a thoughtfully designed, well-funded parole or probation program can determine whether a person becomes a responsible community member or a repeat offender. But the average parole officer now has 60 offenders to manage. The average probation officer has 100. It is nearly impossible for the very best of these officers to have substantial contact with each offender. Often the result is jail time for minor parole or probation violations or for new criminal activity. And now that potential provider, employee, and taxpayer must now be cared for 24/7 in an environment far less likely to yield positive outcomes, all at your expense. But you have an opportunity. At this time, many states are making the courageous decision to employ more just, intelligent, and sustainable measures for corrections. Steps have been taken to identify those for whom drug treatment, mental health services, job training, and education are vastly more effective than incarceration. For those who have served their time, strong reentry programs work to return ex-offenders into society with a stable footing from which to reinvent their lives. But for this to happen, private citizens, civil servants, business owners, faith organizations, everyone must be on board. The alternative is a prison population that continues to grow to the detriment of our nation, unless you act.
I want to thank everybody for their attention to the video. I'm Liz DuPont-Deal. I'm Vice President of Development and Communications at Career Resources in Bridgeport. And we were proud to partner in the creation of this video by John Santa. And it's kind of fitting to show that on a panel called Stories from the Front Lines, because what we'll hear from John is a lot of activism and outreach such as that video. That video is online for everybody to see, and it's one of a couple that he's created in efforts to, as he said, educate the community as to the problems that we're hearing all about and the scope of activity needed from all of us. So happy to be here. Career Resources, it's fun to see Steve Lanza in the audience here too, as well as Scott Wilderman, because those two gentlemen sitting in Scott's office about 6 years ago resulted in the creation of the Bridgeport Reentry Collaborative, which you know, a lot of friends here know, and there are other collaboratives similar in other cities now. So that's good work being carried forward. I'm just going to introduce each of the panelists very quickly, since there's a full bio in your packet, and we'll talk about, spend a little bit of time hearing from each of them about their experiences, and we'll try to save some room for questions later on. We're going to start out with Ivan Kuzyc. Ivan is the Director of Statistical Analysis Center at OPM, where he analyzes criminal justice policy and planning division. His monthly prison indicators is an excellent report, and he's got a lot to say about statistically where are we now, what is this doing to our communities. We're going to go on to Sarah Russell, who co-directs the Civil Justice Clinic from Quinnipiac Law School. She's also a visiting lecturer at Yale, and she helps students actually represent low-income clients and work on policy projects. We'll move on to Kennard Ray, who is the political director for the Connecticut Working Families Party, and has also become recently involuntarily famous for his personal experience with having a job offer yanked away from him due to his criminal convictions. So a lot of us have heard about that on the news. Kennard has gotten a lot of attention, a lot of support has rallied in his behalf also. We'll hear from John Santa, who after a 40-year career in marketing, finance, and finally CEO of Santa Energy, was the creator and founder of Malta Prison Volunteers, which has evolved into the Malta Criminal Justice Initiative, which produced that video. I know that John has appeared before 30 or 40 Rotary clubs, really convincing people to hire ex-offenders kind of out there in the community, trying to persuade people to change the attitudes in a way that will support Ban the Box and other kind of policy initiatives. Finally, we'll talk to Giselle Jacobs, who is a U.S. Army veteran and lifelong resident of Hartford, and now works with the IMRP, doing outreach and advocacy with the Children of Incarcerated Parents Project. And then we'll hear from Dara Young, who is the program manager of the Wesleyan Center for Prison Education, where Wesleyan goes into prisons and actually is holding college classes there. So as you can imagine, the demand is great, the output is great. It's a real bright spot for us to all learn from. So we'll start out with Ivan. We're going to try to have everybody talk for about 8 minutes or so, and then move forward. Thanks.
I'm on. Is it on? Hello, my name is Ivan Kuzyc. I work at OPM. I've been there about 5 years. I do a lot of quantitative analysis on the criminal justice system. I do an annual report on recidivism among prisoners. I also do a monthly report on flows in and out of the criminal justice system, and I also do projections. The name of this panel is sort of Life on the Front Lines, what we see, and that doesn't sound like I'm really on the front lines, but the really good part of my job is I have a lot of autonomy, and I'm able to actually get to the front lines. And so the best part of my job is being in prisons and parole offices and talking to people who are operational. Thousands of people in Connecticut employed in the criminal justice system, and many thousands of people every year who are pushed through the criminal justice system. and are affected by the criminal justice system. And that's just not the people involved, but their families and the communities. And so it's really a human game. And it's very important to remember that when we think about the system, we're talking about a system that's processing people. And that's really what I've come away with in the work that I've done. I was trained as an engineer, and I was trained to look at, I was trained to do systems analysis. And what's always struck me about the criminal justice system is it's really organized on the front end and not very organized on the back end. In that, you know, when you get arrested, you know what the process is: arraignment and bond and pretrial incarceration and disposition and sentencing. And all that's very well ordered. But on the back end, how you get out and what happens to you isn't very well ordered at all. In theory, there are offender assessment plans. People know sort of what the needs are that people face when they go out. And in theory, there's an alignment of programs and things that are out there to help them. But we really don't know systematically how all that works, whether it works, how, you know, what really we're getting out of it in terms of bang for the buck. In the previous panel, you heard everybody talk about sort of data and how we know so much about the system and how we've just a lot of good people doing a lot of great work. I work in the executive branch where it's really not as easy to get your hands on the data and to understand really what impact we're making and how measurable that is. And being a data guy, you know, that's always the thing that I'm aware of first. We know a lot, but we also don't know a lot. We don't know really what works in Connecticut systematically. When you go out and talk to people on parole, you hear there are issues with sort of how to live, where to live, healthcare, jobs. But when you talk to parolees and say, well, what are your chances of making it? Really, everybody's kind of in a lottery game. It's like, we don't know with any certainty whether people are going to get out and succeed or not. We live in a system where every year about 16,000 sentenced people leave prison. And of those 16,000 people, 75% of them are not completing their first prison sentence. They're completing their second or third or fourth or fifth sentence. So what we're talking about is not just 16,000 people sort of at random. We're talking about 16,000 people who tend to circle through the system. And what that means is we're not talking about just a certain percentage of people going into the system and then being spit out at the other end. We're talking about people who are constantly in that system. And when they're in it, their families are in it. And they all live in the same communities. And so criminal justice is intertwined into all of these communities. And as we saw in the videotape, the poorer the neighborhood, sort of the more likelihood that you're going to have a large involvement. You know, you hear about the $1 million neighborhoods. Those $1 million neighborhoods exist in Connecticut's major cities. As they've taken down housing projects in the major cities, those problems have moved out to the older suburbs, but they're still there and they're still concentrated. And it's not just an issue of crime. It's an issue that's interrelated to a way of life. I used to work at Trinity College. And when I was at Trinity College, the administration wanted to find ways to build bridges between a $50,000 a year liberal arts institution and one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. And what I discovered very quickly was that everybody was really interested about criminal justice and public safety, but it wasn't just public safety. I mean, in that neighborhood, you had issues with undereducation, unemployment, lack of jobs, health problems, mental health issues, just on. And criminal justice was really just one aspect of sort of a social system that was feeding sort of this system at the front end. And then the people that were coming out were coming back to those very same neighborhoods and often never able to escape. And
2 minutes, Ivan.
So I don't mean to be a downer. We still are a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. But these are very difficult issues. And we need to know more about them. And we need to consider the people that go through them as people. In my research, I deal a lot with people who are police, corrections officer, wardens, prosecutors, people in the system. It's refreshing to go out and talk to people who are actually in the system. We don't have a lot of good feedback as to what works and what doesn't work. We don't have a lot of good data on what those circumstances are. You know, it's odd, the United States Army had problems with suicide, so they hired anthropologists to go in and talk to soldiers. And in a way, we could do very well to think about forgetting about quantitative analysis and getting some anthropologists to go back and talk to prisoners and find out really what's happening on the ground. I'm sorry I didn't have charts and figures, but I just sort of want to give you my impression of what I deal with.
Thank you, Ivan. You see why I put him first, so that we can, you know, build from there and be a little more cheerful later. Ivan's presented in the past, and I've heard him present the statistic, which is really just shocking, about the ratio of men to women in Hartford. Ivan, do you have that at the tip of your tongue?
Well, I had done some analysis when I was at Trinity College in 2000, and it turned out that in some of the poorest neighborhoods, based on census tract data in 2000, that when you looked at sort of people by sex and age, what you'd find is for African Americans, for blacks in places like Upper Albany and Clay Arsenal in Hartford, you would have ratios of people between the ages of, say, 25 and 40. You would have gaps where for every 100 women, there were 82 men, or 75 men. And when you look at that kind of demographic imbalance in that age group, what you do is you look at places like Bosnia after the war, where all the men got killed. And what's happening, oddly, is that the criminal justice system, the prison system, takes large groups of sort of African Americans in those prime ages where they should be running families, and they're no longer in those communities. And in effect, they disappear from the count from that point going forward. And I just happened to look at the data again for Hartford County at the tract level for 2010. And of all the counties, all the tracts in Hartford County, I looked at African Americans again, and I sort of sorted it by the largest African American, the tracts with the largest African American population, and that imbalance hasn't gone away. Now, what's odd about it is, so you find in tract, say, 4532, you'll find that for every 100 African American women between the ages of 25 and 40, there's 80 men. But in an odd way, there are some tracts where for every African American, 100 African American woman, there are 1,000 African American men. And when you look at the data, you go, well, isn't that odd? And then it turns out that's the census tract where you have a prison. Right. So, you know, the census data can tell you a lot without even knowing about geography. But
Ivan makes data fun, doesn't he? Thank you. So next we wanted to hear from Sarah Russell about some of her work in the clinic.
Thanks. Well, it's an honor to be here, and it's great to see a room full of so many people who care about these issues. So I teach a legal clinic at Quinnipiac University School of Law, and students have the chance to represent low-income clients and also work on public policy projects. And one area of focus for us has been prisoner reentry issues. And so we've assisted clients facing a range of issues related to prior convictions. So helped individuals who were denied public housing based on prior convictions, people who were denied occupational licenses, like a nursing license or a taxi driver license, based on prior records. We've also helped individuals who have spent time in prison and have large child support orders in efforts to get those orders reduced so they're able to get back on their feet while still making some amount of payments. And finally, we've helped people apply for pardons before the Board of Pardons and Paroles. And so I think through that work have seen and allowed students to see the really substantial challenges that people in Connecticut face based on their prior convictions and barriers that they face in terms of successfully reentering and reintegrating into communities. And we've seen this even in cases of individuals who have had no criminal convictions for 15 or 20 years, still facing substantial barriers to employment, housing, and otherwise based on those convictions. And so one major challenge, obviously, for people with convictions is finding a job. And I wanted on that topic to address just briefly two recent legal developments in that area. So first, I'll speak about the relatively new guidance from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the federal EEOC. And then I want to mention a proposal that the Connecticut Sentencing Commission has recommended in terms of legislation on this issue. So first, regarding the EEOC guidance. So in 2012, the EEOC reaffirmed its longstanding rule that employers may not have blanket policies that just simply deny employment to people with prior records. Instead, under Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act, an applicant may be denied based on a criminal conviction only if that conviction is job-related and the denial is consistent with a business necessity. And this new guidance really strongly encourages employers to engage in individualized assessments of criminal convictions and not have these blanket policies. And the EEOC has stepped up enforcement action in these areas. So this is an area that employers in Connecticut and beyond should be looking at to be sure that they're in compliance with federal law in this area. So essentially the new EEOC guidance encourages a two-step process. The first step is called the relevance screen. And here the employer is looking at the risks associated with the particular type of job to determine which type of convictions are really relevant to that job. So not all convictions are going to be presenting risks for all types of jobs, and there needs to be this individualized look at the type of job and its relationship to the type of conviction. And then the employer needs to determine a look-back period so that you're not counting all convictions no matter how old they are, but you're only going to be looking at the more recent convictions. And so that's the first step. That's called developing the relevant screen for convictions. And if your leading candidate for the job doesn't have a conviction that fits within that more narrowly tailored relevance screen, then your hiring process is done and you hire that leading candidate. Now, if your best candidate does have a conviction that fits within that screening test, then the new guidance from the EEOC says you're not done. You can't just reject that person. Instead, you should be moving towards an individualized assessment. So you give that person an opportunity to have some back and forth exchange to present information about whether they have, say rehabilitated, whether that conviction indeed is relevant to the job, and that there'd be some form of individualized examination of the conviction and the person before the person's denied employment. And so this is the new guidance that's out. There's a really helpful guide from the National Hire Network for people who want to learn more about this. This is on the National Hire Network's website. It's called Best Practices for Proper Use of Criminal Records in Hiring. And they recommend things such as not asking about criminal history at all on a job application, doing it in a later stage in the process, having the consumer reporting agencies only report the convictions that are going to be relevant to the particular job, so you don't get a kind of a more broad or blanket type record check done at all. And giving individuals the opportunity in this individualized assessment to present information about rehabilitation. So I'd recommend employers in the room and others who want to learn more about this to check out this guide on the National Hire Network's website about these guidelines. So the second piece I just wanted to touch on that's relevant to this employment and criminal history issue is a proposal from the Connecticut Sentencing Commission on this issue. And the Commission's proposal comes out of an awareness that people with criminal records are facing challenges here in Connecticut in finding jobs, even when these individuals have undergone really substantial forms of rehabilitation. And so the proposal is to create something called a certificate of rehabilitation. And the idea is that individuals who have undergone substantial rehabilitation would be able to apply through the Court Support Services Division, CSSD, for one of these certificates. And the certificate would have the same legal effect and be issued under similar standards as the current provisional pardons are from the Board of Pardons and Paroles. And this certificate could be something that someone would then present to an employer, or if they're applying for a license before the state licensing board, would be able to present this in conjunction with their application, and hopefully increase their chances of obtaining a job, because they would essentially have a stamp of approval from the probation department about their degree of rehabilitation. And it would also be a way for private employers and state employers and licensing boards to obtain more verified information about a person's rehabilitation efforts. And this, I think, ties in well with the new EEOC guidance, which is really requiring private employers to learn more about people's efforts to obtain rehabilitation, and requiring employers to look more carefully at people before denying them based on prior records. So I think this proposal ties in nicely to that and would provide an opportunity for employers to get more information about people. Another piece of the Sentencing Commission proposal is also designed to give employers an incentive to hire people with prior records who have undergone employment, and this would give a sort of limited protection in negligent hiring lawsuits to private employers, so that they have to be, in essence, less fearful about hiring someone with a record because they would have this form of protection under state law. So those are just pieces of the proposal that the Connecticut Sentencing Commission has recommended, so people can keep their eyes out for that in the next legislative session. So the Sentencing Commission's website will track the various legislative proposals for that.
Thanks. Okay, now we're going to hear from Kennard Ray. Can I just ask for like a quick show of hands as to how many people have heard about this case in the news? Okay, yeah, it's pretty much out there. I can say I've known Kennard. We've worked together on a number of issues over the years, and I heard his name on Channel 3 News a couple months ago and was very startled and called him like a number of other people. So I'm gonna let him tell a story about what happened.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks everybody for having me. I saw like 8 people raise their hands, and all folks that I know. So I guess I'm gonna have to go into the story a little bit. But first, just starting with Bob Farr and then moving on to this panel to Sarah and Ivan, what I'm hearing is there's this plethora of issues, social and economic issues that go into making a person a future inmate. And you put these things into a meat grinder and move this person through a system, and then when they're on their way out on the back end, as Ivan put it, there's no actual way to care for them. You know, Bob Farr mentioned that there's an inmate leaving with no ID card. He's going back into the community, she's going back into the community, and like one of the biggest scrambles is to figuring out how to get a license, an ID first, and you know, I'll just say it because I've been through it, and some of the people in this room have been through it. They may not be raising their hands, but they have. You know, figuring out how to get your social security card and your birth certificate just so you can go get that ID, so then you can get a job. Like, there's so many hurdles that come with figuring out your new path, so many barriers that you're always at a step behind. So as Liz said, I've worked with Liz for years. You know, doing policy stuff that people would think that someone who's a convicted felon could not do. Why is this guy up at the Capitol? Why is he a lobbyist? Is he lobbying for some, you know, some of this sentencing commission type stuff or whatever? I've never worked on any of this stuff. I've always asked Andrew to give me a little bit to work on, but I've never worked on any of this stuff. You know, I've worked on the things that address the person before they become that inmate or before they become the statistic. Poverty issues, you know, the minimum wage, things like that play into really creating the environments that we have now that continue to pump out this problem that we have, that you're all here to address. So my personal story is I was appointed to a position in the City of Hartford Mayor's office, to the office of the Deputy Chief of Staff this past November. And when the a press release went out, there was a lot of fanfare. People were happy that I was coming on board. Sent the press release out, something came back from the media. And just to be forward with this, Hartford and 4 other cities in Connecticut, as well as statewide, has an ordinance called Ban the Box. That means you don't have to disclose your criminal history until the day of or just before hire. So it was the first time I've ever been in a position like that. So I was like, I'll wait until I'm actually hired. I was in the appointment process, mayor was thumbs up about it, and then bang, this thing hits the media. So we'll just say that I didn't start that job. And I guess there's an important story there in not starting the job, is no matter how many policy changes we make, because you guys are mostly policymakers, although I know there's some other folks in there, there's also the cultural changes that have to be made. We have to start working to make sure that the cultural shifts are made, that folks can start to see that this person convicted of whatever they were convicted of, or this person who's gone through the system is a person now, not a number, not one of them, but a person, someone that's been reintegrated into society and has to earn a living, as John's video showed us, people have to be providers. So taking a person out of the position of being a provider and keeping them in a place where they're just a statistical number requires a lot of effort on the part of the folks in this room and talking to the folks outside of this room and making sure that it's a cultural shift. Liz and I talked about this beforehand. It's a cultural shift that moves not just the people who live in the major cities that have the bulk of the reentry population, but the people who are outside of them, the people who live in infill or summers who benefit from tax credits, who could finally say, you know what, we're not comfortable with knowing that these folks are getting out of the situation and they can't be employed, or they can't go back to school, or they can't go back to the places where they formerly lived because guess what, their mother, father, or whoever it may be is on public assistance, and they can't live there because of their criminal history, and or they can't get state assistance to help them through while they're working to get a license or a social security card or what have you because of their convictions. So my big thing, and I know I'm a little limited on time, but my big thing and the things that I want to impress on all of you here is being mindful of the cultural shift that needs to be made. We all, there's a bunch of smart people in the room, and I'm sure someone in the room can say that they're the smartest person in the room, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it stays in this room. It doesn't matter if it just goes back to your desk. It matters that it matters when you can synthesize this information and make it make sense to folks that are your next door neighbors, to folks that are in your family, to your friends. They need to be the ones that can carry on the message and understand that if we're talking about a long-term change in the way that we address criminal justice in our society, then we're going to have to think about a long-term cultural shift.
Thank you. And I want to say also, sometimes public policy moves in odd ways, right? We all know that. And since this happened with Kennard, this was early December, right? And so he was kind of, outed and the job was withdrawn. But there have been a lot of rallies in front of City Hall, and there's been, movements on Twitter. He's been, featured in some national news stories. So I think the end of this story is yet to be written, but certainly it's one of those teachable moments, and I think that some forces are moving in that direction. So John Santa is someone who I have a lot of respect for, as someone who really understands just what Kennard was talking about, and that is that a lot of us, people can believe the wrong facts, and hearing the right facts doesn't change anybody's mind. They have to see something that they connect with, they have to feel something. So John has done tremendous work over the years, first with the Malta Prison Volunteers, and now with the Malta Criminal Justice Initiative, coalescing like-minded people, really building himself a megaphone, using the internet, making the movie that you saw, and there's one other 3.5-minute video about hiring ex-offenders, talking to employers, and firsthand testimonials about that kind of work. So I'll let John talk about his work and his mission now.
Thanks, Liz. First of all, I want to say how edified I am to be on this panel, to be able and speak here with all of you today. And I want to tell you furthermore how very, very impressed I am with the fact that there are so many good people like all of you who are engaged in this important social need, and that you'll take the time to come here today. Give yourselves a hand. You're terrific to show up here today. It's terrific. Very, very, very good. It speaks very good things for where we can go. So that said, I want to tell you, to hell with reentry. I don't care about reentry. What I like is no entry. And that's what we want to do. That's what we're after, Malta Criminal Justice Initiative. We heard this morning about some terrific things going on here the past 10 years, justice reinvestment and the like, and it's been terrific. It really has been. But face the facts, troopers. We're here in the land of the free, the home of the brave, and we in the history of the world, no nation has ever incarcerated so many of its citizens as we are. That's wrong. I don't care how you slice it. That's wrong. We have more black men in prison today than we had in slavery in 1863. That's wrong. That's simply wrong. 34 Western nations with a population, a free population, 2.5 times ours, they don't have half of our prison population. What's up with that? So yes, we have made progress, and we got to have more. And the fact that you're all sitting here and you're all taking this time, that says to me, to us, to Malta Criminal Justice Initiative, that I think we might be going someplace. I think the stars might be aligning. So stick around a little bit, because in a couple of hours or so, or maybe an hour or two, the nice folks in the Vera Institute will be here. They went to Germany. They went to Holland. They kind of saw the vision that Pat Hines was talking about of no incarceration. Holy cow. And what's part of it? This is crazy. This is crazy. They treat the prisoners like adult human beings. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine a world in which we would shift the paradigm enough that we would start treating people like adult human beings in prison. And therefore, when they got out of prison, guess what they'd act like? Adult human beings, perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. With our Executive Director, Kathy Taylor, myself, and with the help of my colleagues at Malta Criminal Justice Initiative, we made a tour of 40 Rotary, Kiwanis, and Alliance clubs here in Connecticut in the past year and a half or so. Ostensibly, we went there to talk about Prodigal Project and convincing business owners to hire qualified ex-offenders. Well, that was fine. We just went and told them about what's going on in criminal justice and the like, and we told them about what the state is, and we told them about how much they're paying for it and what the results they're getting out of it. And what we found was there was an abysmal lack of knowledge about what's going on in criminal justice among the regular, just walking around free population. They just don't know. Because quite honestly, unless your friend or a friend or somebody you know goes to prison, really it's like, what the hell, who cares? Oh, there's prisoners. What do you spend time with those people for? Well, there's a good reason to do that. There's a good reason to do that, and it's to the benefit of all of us. So therefore, what we're doing now is we are in the world of, at Malta Criminal Justice Initiative, to educate and inform people And specifically, we're targeting the business communities. You're going to hear from Jim Torgerson from UI in a little bit. The faith communities, a number of you are here. Keep it up. We're a faith community at Malta. And the academic communities, like Sarah and the like, and Dara, from the academic communities. Because we want to help those people find their voice, to speak up and to say, stop it. Stop this. Stop this lunacy. It's time to stop. Sometimes people wonder, what is Malta, the Order of Malta doing in this prison business? The Order of Malta, for those of you who don't know, is a 900-year-old religious order of Roman Catholic lay people, men and women, who work on behalf of the sick and the poor. Hello? 9 out of 10 people in prison have a compulsive addictive behavior issue. They're sick. 1 out of 5 of them has a diagnosable mental illness. They're sick. If they weren't poor going in, they'll be poor coming out. So that's what we're doing there. And so we invite you to join us in advocating for treatment versus punishment, because I think that might go somewhere. We invite you to join us in shifting that paradigm from treating prisoners as permanently marginalized people, like our colleague just told you about here, and did a beautiful job with the city of Hartford, and had to give it up because he's permanently identified. Oh, no, he's an ex-offender. Let's stop that. That's not helping anybody. So we invite you to join us. And please invite us to your faith community, invite us to your business community, invite us to your academic community. We'd love to come and discuss this and have an active dialogue about it. Thank you very much, Liz.
I say John was a true gentleman. He kept right to his time to make up for the fact that we showed his movie.
Yeah, I had to. I told you. I promised, Liz. I promised.
Which, by the way, is available at MPV, like Most Valuable Player, mpvct.org under videos. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Giselle Jacobs, who works at IMRP with the Children of Incarcerated Parents Project, which talk about on the front lines. I mean, Andrew has done some great conferences here about the fact that nobody thinks about the children of incarcerated parents. It's a huge issue. Giselle?
Hello? That's good. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Giselle Jacobs, and I work with the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy in their Children of Incarcerated Parents Initiative. And I just want to talk a little bit first about how I became involved with the Institute. It was just a few short years ago. I was volunteering out in the community, you know, looking for ways that I could just give back. At the time, I was unemployed. At the time, I had recently relocated back from Boston. And I chose not to just, you know, sit at home and do nothing in between looking for work. And I need to say it was difficult for me to find employment despite the fact that I was not a felon, despite the fact that I was qualified and capable of working. It was difficult. So, you know, my heart really went out to individuals who, you know, did have felonies and were unable to find employment. And because of the volunteering that I was doing out in the community, a friend of mine suggested that I attend a dialogue that was taking place in different parts of Hartford for the Children of Incarcerated Parents Initiative. They were aware that I, you know, am an adult child of incarcerated parents, and also at the time my oldest son was serving 8 years on a 15-year bid. And in my becoming involved with those dialogues, I went from sitting on a steering committee at the Hartford Public Library, along with the Everyday Democracy and the Institute, and through that volunteering with the Children of Incarcerated Parents Initiative, I became more passionate about what was going on with that initiative than what I was involved with, and I have since been involved with it. You know, we put on an action forum on November the 4th in 2010, and from that action forum, individuals in the community had an opportunity to talk about what it was that they needed to be able to get through having a loved one incarcerated, being a parent or a caretaker of a child in the community who has a parent incarcerated. And we developed 8 task force from that action forum, one of which was a community support group. so that individuals who are caring for children in the community who have a parent incarcerated will have some place to go with and meet with others who are experiencing, similar challenges. And so that support group, began in my living room. I was smart enough to invite Andrew Clark to the first support group and feed him some soul food. We had some fried chicken and, barbecue and yams and mac and cheese. And it was just a few short years later that he actually offered to contract with me part-time. And I'm still with the Institute. It's been a blessing. I've gone from, being unemployed and homeless to just closing on a 2-family house on Capon Street in the north end of Hartford in June. So when Mr. Dyson talked about how what our community needs is hope, those are the type of things that gives our community hope. When they see individuals who were once where they were, once behind bars, once homeless, once on substance abuse, once dealing with the same things that they're dealing with, like come up out of that, like change their lives. That's what gives our community hope, man. Like last year, my son was on this panel. Corey came home in December of 2012. And he was released to one of those AIC programs. But for the grace of God, he made it out of that program without getting locked back up. While he was in that program, there were individuals selling drugs. While he was in that program, there were individuals doing drugs, getting drunk. Matter of fact, he had a taste himself, even though parole told him, you can't drink when you get home. You can't smoke no more marijuana when you get home. Prior to him leaving that program, he was able to find employment part-time, $8.50 an hour. He worked that job from January to August of 2013. After having been released from that particular environment, he came home to live with me in January, somewhere around the end of January, and like I said, he himself was on this panel sharing about his experience with incarceration. And like in August, he was at work, and his parole officer and about 4 other guys like walked on the job and like took him off the job because of a technicality. He missed curfew. And I believe had it not been for the fact that his regular PO was switched out like a couple of days prior, this new person like didn't have a relationship with Corey, didn't have a relationship with me and the family, they may have been able to work through that, so he'll be home in a couple of weeks and, ready to move forward, and hopefully we'll have learned from that experience and the importance of doing what you're supposed to do when you come home. So I was asked to come here, 4 more minutes left? I was asked to come here and talk about the stories that I hear on the front line. The stories that I hear on the front line are similar to what me and my own son has experienced. Individuals coming home from jail not prepared to get work that will allow them to be able to take care of their families. My son has a 10-year-old daughter. Well, she turned 10 like a week after he went back to jail in August. Broke her heart, broke my heart. It was very discouraging to see him go out and look for work during the day while he worked that, part-time, full-time minimum wage job. In the evenings, he would be out during the day, either trying to enroll in construction training or, something that would afford him the opportunity to get a better paying job. And even myself had an opportunity of going through one of those construction trainings that they offer, oftentimes to individuals who are coming out of incarceration. It's our hopes that some of that stuff can start getting done while they're in there, so that they're not having to come home from incarceration, enroll in a 5 or 6 month long construction training program, where you don't have any income coming in. Half the time they didn't have lunch money. Half the time they didn't even have IDs to go down to the State Department to sign up for whatever licenses we were being offered. So there's a lot of obstacles and barriers that are taking place. And before I close, I just want to touch on this because I call myself getting ready for this. So I went on YouTube and I found some conferences that were taking place like years ago. And there was one that took place in 2010 on Capitol Hill. I saw Mike Lawler on, I think he was the moderator, and there was a Dr. Doug Marlowe and a Dr. Ad Latisse, and they shared some of the very same things that we just saw here this morning. Whoa, what about that? Like, that was in 2010. We're in 2014. And we're still talking about those same risk assessments that they talked about back in 2010. We're talking about those same, one of the things they talked about that I didn't hear talked about here this evening that I want to, like, touch on real quick. And it had something to do with, like, grading organizations that are receiving funding. They actually had a name for the ones that don't work, and they called them programs. Am I right? They're laughing because when they came to my home this morning, before we could pull out the roll up here, some arrived at 7, others at 7:30. I put the YouTube show on so they could see what I experienced on Sunday night. So that's why they were laughing. But I just thank you for giving me
Maybe we can show it during lunch.
Yeah. Yeah, and listen, look, I'm up here, but any one of our members from Breaking the Cycle could have been up here sharing the same similar stories as to what it is that we do. We're out there, we're on the front lines, you know, offering hope and sharing with individuals that, look, we've changed our lives. We are changing our lives, and you can too. We have Tommy Richardson here. He's been in every Department of Corrections facility in the state of Connecticut since, what, 12 or 13 years old. He's been out for several years. He's working. He's employed. He's been volunteering for years with Breaking the Cycle from the beginning. Miss Alice just got on board with us. You know, she cooks for us. She shows up. You know, we got Leo here and Mr. Murphy here from the greater New Haven area who wants to be involved with Breaking the Cycle and showing others. That's what they need to see, real live examples of individuals who are changing their lives. That's what gives us hope. Thank you.
Thank you. We need, this is good so we can figure out what works. That's good. I want to thank Andrew and all the work on the children of incarcerated parents. I remember attending a conference here a couple of years ago and subsequently talking to a social worker in a Hartford public school who said to me, and I believe Sue Quinlan was there too, we were trying to get a project going, and he said, you know, we all know that we have, it's like the elephant in the room because we have not been trained on this. We know that we have a lot of children with this issue, and look at what they're coping with, you know, like your granddaughter. And there's no systemic kind of way to, you know, and of course you don't want to call them, you know, on the loudspeaker down to the classroom after school either. That's not the answer, but we definitely need to think more about this. Okay, so we're going to close with Dara Young, who is a program manager for the Wesleyan Center for Prison Education. This is only a couple of years old, and this is a true bright spot. She also has a short film on her website, which is maybe 9 minutes long or so, which features, you know, some interviews with the professors who teach at this program and some of the inmates who have such a resoundingly positive experience. Education is so transformative, and if we could make this available to more people, it would be so amazing. So, Dara?
Thank you. So this is a little unfair to me to sandwich me between this and lunch, right? What am I supposed to say?
And questions.
And questions. So I am the program manager for the Wesleyan Center for Prison Education, which I very much hope is not one of the programs. So we bring Wesleyan professors into 2 facilities in Connecticut, Cheshire, which is a maximum security men's facility, and York, which is the state's only women's facility. And we have our professors teach the same classes that they teach on Wesleyan campus to students. They've gone through a rigorous admissions process. We've done 4 admissions processes. They're taking pre-calculus, biology, chemistry, medical anthropology, political theory, gender theory, anything that you would be able to take on Wesleyan's campus to the degree possible given the circumstances, we try to bring to our facilities. And I had a lot planned to say, but I think one thing that I just want to mention very briefly is we're talking a lot about reentry, and I think one of the smartest things that people say about reentry is reentry needs to start on your first day in prison. And we've talked a lot about what happens when you get out, but what we really focus on at CPE is what happens while you're in, and how to make every day doable, and how to bring hope to a really hopeless situation, and how to treat individuals who have been really dehumanized by the system, not only as humans, but as students and as intellectual individuals who produce work that our professors sometimes say is better than what the on-campus students do, so not to brag. And I think about this every time when you drive to Cheshire. It's on the main street in Cheshire, Connecticut, which is just sort of a Connecticut suburb. And there's a little sign on the side of the road, but the entire facility is blocked off by a row of trees that you can't see through. And to me, that's very emblematic of the way that we treat prisoners in our society. We put them inside facilities, we put up a row of trees, and we try not to think about it. And one of the things that CPE does that I think is incredibly important is we not only bring our faculty in, but we bring our on-campus traditional students into the facilities to work with our incarcerated students as equals, as peers. And breaking down that gap and that wall that exists between the people in our society that we incarcerate and the people that we don't is so key to bringing about the cultural shift that I think Kennard was talking about, and to really having success in criminal justice reform, because unless we see what's going on behind those prison walls, we don't know what we're talking about and we don't know what we're doing. So that, I think, is one of the values that a program like CPE really brings, is to say, we're not going to allow the physical barrier to separate us, and we're going to continue to operate as treating prisoners as individuals who are still part of society. Just to say that. To go back to a little bit to what CPE actually does, one thing, I feel a little odd being on a reentry panel, or a panel that's spoken so much about reentry, because we really are an education program, and we think of ourselves as such, and we conceive of ourselves as such. And one of the things that is really emblematic of that is that when we have this application process, we don't take sentences into account, we don't take crimes into account. There are 52 students in our program. Some of them have shared with me their stories as to why they're incarcerated, many do not. I do not know, I do not ask, I treat them as students. And so we have many lifers in our program, or people who have 33 years left on a 66-year bid. And why do we do that? I mean, we are asked that basically every single day by the Department of Correction officers. Why don't we focus on the people who are coming out? And one thing is, I just believe in the right to education, and that's what our program believes in. And we don't believe in putting people away and asking them to sit for 24 hours a day watching TV or going to the gym, and that's enough to fill your time. We believe that that people in prison deserve the same services that people outside of prison deserve. And then the other thing that we believe really strongly, and this goes to sort of what you've been talking about children of incarcerated individuals, is that nobody does their time alone, right? As an incarcerated individual, you are a member of your housing block. And if you are in our program, we've seen over the short time that we have been operating, that the people in our program become real leaders in the facility. Not only do disciplinary problems within the cohort that we admit get reduced, but that has a ripple effect. It has a calming effect on the facility, and they bring back to the block, oh, I'm doing this reading, and let's talk about this. And then the other people who do your time with you is your family. And we have these amazing stories of one of our students, Bashan. His daughter is 17 years old, and she is going to be applying to Wesleyan next year. Looking at her father going back to school. He's, I guess, 36 years old. He's been in since he's 20 years old, and his daughter was born right before he went in. And she can say, my father's back in college. I'm going to do that too. We have another individual. He also in his 30s. His father, who is in his 50s or 60s, has now gone back to college, based on looking at his son doing this again at the age of 35. So I think that's really important, and I think it's really important to think that even as we're sort of thinking through systems and outcomes and things like that, that these are individuals, and even if they are not going to be coming out at the end of this, they're still part of our society, and we still owe them something. We shouldn't just lock them up and throw away the key. How am I doing on time? I'm good? Okay, so really quickly, what's the role of a liberal arts education in prison? Why are we teaching Aristotle and Shakespeare in maximum security facilities? Well, before 1994, this was something that happened all the time, right? There were over 300 college and prison programs all over this country. And then as part of the Violent Crime Control Act that Clinton passed in 1994, Pell Grants for prisoners were eliminated. And basically every single program across the nation, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, was closed within a course of 3 years. We are totally supported by private donations. There are a handful of other programs like ours. BARD has been doing this for 10 years. Goucher is getting started up. Quinnipiac has offers, Trinity does some classes. But we're talking about, tens, maybe dozens, as opposed to 300. And why? And because we have this sort of long history of college and prison, there's been really good statistical analysis that has been done that shows that a college education, not vocational training, can be one of the most effective tools in reducing recidivism. Statistics are hard to deal with. I'm also not a statistical person, so I don't want to claim that. But different, DOJ, Department of Justice funded studies have shown reductions in recidivism from 29% to 46%, just from participating in a post-secondary education setting while you're incarcerated. But I think that, we're a very small program. We only have 52 students. We have 6 alumni who have been released, and they each have their own individual stories and their own individual struggles. We spend as much time as we can connecting them to academic opportunities, but there are a lot of barriers. And just to touch quickly on what some of these are, we have had students we have a student who's admitted to the new school, but we couldn't deal with their parole officer to have parole transferred to New York so that they could start attending college. We've had students who have enrolled in community college, but they're still living in their halfway house, and the halfway house doesn't understand that a TA session or a study session also counts as school, and so won't let them out to go to those activities that are part of the academic experience. And then, and this is obviously kind of something that touches all of us, there's the money issue. We have students who are coming out, they have a Wesleyan transcript that says they've been getting A's in Wesleyan classes, and we want them to be going to schools like the new school, to UConn, but they simply can't afford it, and the financial aid isn't there, and they haven't been working for however many years, and they have children. And so these are, again, these sort of very pragmatic barriers that while we have students who are totally capable and have outshined some of their on-campus counterparts, in an academic setting, they get out, and these practical barriers of your parole officer saying you can't transfer to go to school is what's keeping them from completing their college education. So I know I'm supposed to be a bright spot, and I don't want to end on that note, and I do think that to go into a classroom at Cheshire or at York and watch the students engage in the way they do is a transformative experience, and it's a moment where the students have said to me, I go down to the room, I don't feel like a prisoner anymore. And that is worth something, and I know that every day we provide that, and we make each day easier to do. And I don't think that the value of that can be underestimated.
Thank you. We want our bright spots to be meaningful, so that was good.
Even more, they feel like smart.
So I'm going to take a couple of questions. I know that everybody's hungry, but we have lunch scheduled at 12:30, and I do want to have questions. So if anybody has a question, they could just, why don't you come up here, because I've got a microphone here that I can give to you. We're going to try to keep this to, we have an extra one here. We're going to try to keep it to 10 minutes. And I just want to say, it occurred to me here that, this panel was, Andrew actually gave me too much credit. He put the panel together, 99% of it. 95%, whatever. I'm not a statistics person either. But as people were talking, I was thinking about the front lines as really being multifaceted, right? I mean, Giselle pointed out the front lines are in the families of everybody who's in prison, and the front lines are actually within the facilities, too. And, every person in the state, I don't care where you live, the fact that this situation exists in Hartford affects you. And we all have to know about that. Okay.
Yes, we saw this morning the data showing incarceration rates in Connecticut peaking out in 07, 08, 09. We also know those are the years of the great recent financial and economic recession. We know those are also the years in which nationwide we lost 8.25 million jobs. We saw this morning the community study with respect to New Haven trying to reduce to a neighborhood level the rates of incarceration and of recidivism, has anyone done, or is anyone capable of doing, neighborhood studies tracing level of economy and or employment trends?
Ivan?
People have begun doing it. I mean, several years ago, Mike Miotti, who was working with, I believe it was CREC at the time, it actually produced maps on people sort of returning to prison in Hartford. When I was at Trinity College, I had done some work in sort of analyzing neighborhoods by census tract and looking at educational attainment and jobs. And what you have is concentrations of misery in Connecticut. I mean, you know, when on the previous panel someone showed a map of a neighborhood in Phoenix with a high concentration of people on probation, I can show you a map of Vine Street in Hartford which has the same thing. I mean, people are coming back. They don't have jobs, they don't have skills, they don't have the ability to set up in places where they used to, and so they come back and they're extremely mobile. It used to be in places like Hartford and New Haven, you had housing projects. So you had multi-generational sort of people settling in, the same social conditions, grandma, mother, sons, nephews, cousins. Now the housing projects are gone, so that population's moving all the time. People don't have fixed locations. One of the problems with census data is you lose a lot of young men in urban areas because they don't have a fixed address where they can be counted. And so they're moving from place to place. We know where these places are, and we know what the problems are. You can take a map and you can put a layer down for substandard schools. And then you can put a different layer down for people receiving social services. And then you can put a layer down for people who have just come out of the criminal justice system. And then you can put another layer down for unemployment. And then you can put another layer down for sort of the amount of income earned. And they all map to the same thing. I mean, at this point, there's no shortage of data pointing out to really what it is. We don't have that one definitive report, but we have so many data points pointing to the same thing that really it's not a thing that we need to be convinced anymore that it's there. We don't need to be able to point to chart 7, page 48. We know it's there. The question now is not that the data's not in. The question is now is what do we do about the data that's in?
Liz, I'll just piggyback on Ivan's answer really quickly, because there's other layers of data and other layers of at least one other map that I would touch on. Those same neighborhoods that you've layered, historically, those same places were redlined. You know, in 1934, when the FHA was created, these are the same neighborhoods where people were kept into these neighborhoods where they weren't able to get out because it was thought, you know, imprudent to loan there, and then they couldn't go into other neighborhoods to because they weren't, at the time, institutionally, weren't allowed into those neighborhoods. So I think just to kind of answer that is what you do with these layers of information, these layers of mapping, is you start giving that information to the folks who are out there so they can start having a voice. Because Mike Lawler one time pointed to, at a similar panel, starting a shame campaign. But you can't start a shame campaign if you're ashamed. If you don't know that you're empowered by historical and empirical information, then there's no shame campaign. But if you have that information, then maybe there's some movement on the ground.
Thank you. And we had a couple more questions up front here.
Yes, my name, well, I guess, Ms. Russell, this question is directed to you. I just came home from prison, and I can't find a part-time job. And I'm trying to live. You know, I can't even find a part-time job. I know exactly what Ms. Jacobs is saying about the curfew. You know, because I have a curfew. I'm on probation now, and I'm scared to death. You know, to go back to prison. You gotta do right. Because I'm limited to do everything. But right now, I just can't find a part-time job. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm in a program, you know, that's paying all my bills. but I've been there too long, and I need some kind of income to help me get back into this so-called, free society. And I'm just asking, can you help me?
It's on? Okay.
Well, I just want to suggest, that's a tough question, and a lot of us work on that and grapple with that. I'm not sure where you live. I would suggest you visit your CT Work Center, or it's now called the American Job Center. Okay. It's tough. I would suggest you talk to me and some others later, because there's people here that should be able to help you. It's uphill. We know that, but that's.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Neil Nelson. I just want. I've been sitting here and I just been trying to get everything collected in my mind, because I ain't come from Vine Street area. I came from West Haven. You know what I mean? I was a statistic in the system in 37 different foster homes. I was beat down mentally. You know what I'm saying? I went to prison because I had to defend myself. When I got out in 1997, I got out with a GED, a 2-year certificate for child care development. I also put myself in Manchester. And today, I'm still fighting society. It's like I'm doing double jeopardy, time after time after time. Because as I apply for a job in the community to help children that comes from different foster homes or come from bad experiences, to help them accomplish more than what I did, I'm knocked down. So I say, everybody here, I'm not saying it was wrong, but we talk a good talk, but you have to walk that walk, because without that walk, people like me don't get a chance. I'm almost 40 years old and I still ain't got a job. And I've been out of jail since 1997, and I just feel that I volunteer my services to children in society, not just from broken down homes, not just from the ghetto, from suburbs, because that's where I'm from, And I just feel that every person that's up here that has always say that they're going to help, they're going to help, they're going to help, we don't never see the help. So I just hope everybody in this room take a chance and help us, or help the ones that are coming up, or your daughter, or your son, or your cousin that could be in the situation that I'm in today. And instead of just talking the talk, let's walk the walk. That's all I'm saying.
I'd like to just, piggyback on that, because I have the liberty and I have a mic now. And I know you're part of the support group, and we met through the Hartford Public Library, and you're my neighbor. It's not a handout. Giselle's been with us a couple of years. It's a blessing. The value that she's brought to this program and the institutional knowledge that she brings is helping us tremendously to understand the barriers that we're dealing with on the policy side of how do you try to make these changes. So it's a win-win. It's not a handout. It's not anything like that. So I just want to put that out there for those who are, contemplating. I know there's other organizations that do hire people with felony convictions as well, but don't look at it as charity. Or it's a reward. It's valuable in and of itself.
Makes sense for everybody. One more? Ivan?
About employment, everybody knows it's difficult. But one thing we're not talking about is structurally it's even more difficult than it's ever been. Between 1985 and 2005, Connecticut lost 49% of its manufacturing employment. People coming out of prison are blue-collar people. They're people that need jobs that don't require high educational skills. A lot of them don't have those skills. They used to be able to come out. For 150 years, people moved from around the country and around the world to places like Hartford because there was labor, a need for labor, jobs, and decent pay. The Irish came, they were followed by the Italians, they were followed by the blacks. People came to this area because there were jobs, and every generation that came, their kids had a better life. And what's happened is we need to recognize, too, that not only has the prison population spiked up since 1985, since 1985, that engine broke. Those jobs left. And what happened is, between 85 and 2012, the Hartford area lost 80,000 manufacturing jobs. Okay, those are jobs which were never replaced, okay? So what it is you say, it's hard. You know, go out there, do the right thing. Nothing's given to you for free. But our society has changed. Our society has changed in a very critical and profound way. So we can't just go, you know, just work a little harder, get your resume tightened up. 80,000 jobs that used to be here. The population's flat, right? The population hasn't grown tremendously, but we lost 80,000 manufacturing jobs, were the kind of jobs that you could come out of prison and go on a burr bench or get a forklift or do something and get a start again. Now, if you can explain to me, I haven't figured it out yet, where those 80,000 jobs are, we wouldn't even have to meet anymore.
Sorry.
Remember, NAFTA. So it just, for me,
well, you're right. You're right.
For me, as somebody who watches policy a little bit more than some other folks, is make sure that, you know, the folks that aren't policymakers, make sure that you look at policy and know that it's not just, it's not Democrat, Republican. Don't look at the partisanship because, you know, a lot of folks here deem Bill Clinton as the first black president, but in passing NAFTA in the Violent Crime Control Act,
and the PLRA, and the anti-death penalty, or the effective death penalty act.
So all those things lumped together help create what's now called the industrial prison complex. And, you know, all those jobs, and I'm not going to say one way or the other, but it's just watch what's happening as best you can. Not just looking for the jobs, because there's 80,000 in the area that are gone, but watch what's happening. Watch the policy.
I think Ivan's absolutely right. It's structural. I want to thank the whole panel because this was very enlightening. We'll continue it at lunch.